Hudson Reed was halfway through rinsing ketchup off his 5-year-old son's hands when he heard the crash glass shattering, followed by a woman's sharp, "I said no, thank you." He turned toward the far corner of the diner, where a man in a loud blazer was waving his arms, clearly drunk, while the woman across from him tried to stand up. Her chair scraped back, but the guy blocked her. "Come on, baby, don't be dramatic," the man slurred. Hudson didn't think he just handed a napkin to his son and said, "Stay right here, buddy," before walking over. "Hey," Hudson said, stepping between them. "She said no." The man looked Hudson up and down, scoffing. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who knows what no means." The woman's eyes met Hudson's wide, grateful, and furious all at once. Her lipstick was smudged, her jaw tight. "Thank you," she whispered. Hudson nodded. "You good to go?" She stood straighter. "Yeah." Hudson turned back to the man. "She's leaving, don't follow." The guy mumbled something under his breath, but didn't move. Hudson walked the woman past the counter and out into the cool night. Outside, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. "Thank you," she said again. "Seriously." Hudson gave a small shrug. "You all right?" "I've had worse dates," she muttered, then winced. "Actually, no, I haven't," he chuckled, then looked over his shoulder. Through the diner window, his son, Nolan, was waving at him with both hands. "That your little one?" she asked. Hudson nodded. "Yeah, Nolan, he's 5. We come here after my shift sometimes." "You saved me mid-fry dip," she said, a smile pulling at her lips. "Mid-fry, mid-cleanup, mid-exhaustion." She laughed, and it was the kind of sound that made you want to keep talking to her. "I'm Vanessa Grant," she said, holding out her hand. "Hudson Reed. Nice to meet you, Vanessa." She looked back at the diner. "Do you think they've got any dignity left in that place? I could really use a plate of fries that doesn't come with a side of harassment." Hudson raised an eyebrow. "You want to join me and Nolan?" Vanessa hesitated, then smiled. "If you're sure." "Come on." Inside, Nolan grinned the second they returned. "Hi," he said, eyes bouncing between Hudson and Vanessa. "Hi there," she said, crouching to his level. "I'm Vanessa." "I'm Nolan." "I had a milkshake." "Lucky you." Hudson slid into the booth, and Vanessa took the seat across from him, beside Nolan, who immediately showed her his crayon drawing of a dinosaur with a jetpack. As they ordered more fries and milkshakes, Vanessa relaxed. She didn't say much about herself, just that she was in town for meetings. Her phone buzzed once she ignored it. Her dress was simple but expensive. Her heels probably cost more than Hudson's rent, but she didn't act like it. She laughed at Nolan's stories and asked Hudson about his job at the auto garage like she actually cared. By the end of the night, Vanessa looked like she didn't want to leave. "I can walk you to your car," Hudson said when they stepped outside. She hesitated. "Actually." "Can I walk you two to yours?" Hudson chuckled. "Sure." He carried Nolan, who'd fallen asleep halfway through his second milkshake, and Vanessa walked beside him, heels clicking softly on the pavement. At his old pickup, she smiled. "Thank you again." "For stepping in. Any decent guy would have done the same. I've met a lot of guys, very few are decent." Hudson put Nolan gently in the backseat, buckling him in. When he turned around, Vanessa was still watching him. "I'm glad you came over," she said. Her voice was softer now. "I didn't think anyone would." He looked at her for a long second. "You shouldn't have to be rescued at dinner." "No," she agreed, "but if I had to be, I'm glad it was by you." There was something in her eyes, curiosity, warmth, something more. "I don't normally do this," she added, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small notepad and pen, scribbled something down, then handed it to him. "If you ever feel like getting fries again." Hudson frowned slightly at the paper. It had a name, Vanessa Grant, and a number. "I will," he said. She smiled and walked off toward a sleek black car that had just pulled up to the curb. Hudson watched as a driver in a suit opened the door for her. He blinked. Driver, suit. That wasn't a rental. That was a car worth more than his house. Who the hell was Vanessa Grant? The next morning, Hudson Googled her name out of curiosity. The first result made his stomach drop. Vanessa Grant, heiress and CEO of Grant Capital Group, worth over $30 billion. He stared at the screen, heart pounding, Nolan's cereal dripping milk onto the counter. She was a billionaire, and she'd given him her number. Hudson had no idea what to do with that, but he knew one thing he couldn't stop thinking about her. Hudson hadn't meant to keep the paper, but it stayed folded in his wallet like a secret he wasn't sure he deserved to keep. He'd nearly thrown it out more than once. What was he going to do, call up a billionaire and ask if she wanted to split a burger and fries again? But 4 days later, while hosing down a rusted-out Camry behind the shop, his mind drifted back to her, how easily she'd laughed with Nolan, the way she'd looked at him like he wasn't just a mechanic with a kid, like he was something more. That night, after Nolan was tucked in with his favorite flashlight and a stack of dinosaur books, Hudson stood in the kitchen staring at the number again. He didn't have her address or social media or any clue where she worked. Just her name and the way she'd looked like she didn't want to say goodbye. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and made a decision. The next morning, he dropped Nolan off with his neighbor, Mrs. Kelly, who watched him sometimes when Hudson picked up weekend shifts. Then he took the oldest button-down he owned, ironed it with a water spray bottle, and drove to the city. He had no plan beyond walking into Grant Capital's headquarters and asking to speak to the woman who'd handed him her number like she wasn't followed by photographers and Forbes articles. The building soared above the skyline, all glass and steel. Inside, the marble floors gleamed beneath his boots, and the woman at the front desk raised an eyebrow the second he stepped in. "Can I help you?" she asked, not unkindly, but definitely surprised. "I'm looking for Vanessa Grant," he said. The woman paused. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Hudson admitted, "but she gave me her number, and I think she wanted me to use it." There was a silence as the receptionist studied him. His collar was slightly wrinkled. His hands still bore faint grease stains, but he stood like a man who wasn't afraid of being told no. She tapped something into her computer. "Wait here." 10 minutes later, a woman in a navy pantsuit stepped off the elevator. She looked him up and down with a guarded expression, but didn't say a word until they were in the elevator alone. "She's in a board meeting," the woman said, "and very busy." "I'll wait," Hudson said. The woman's brow lifted slightly, but she didn't argue. They led him to a waiting area with a view of the city that made his truck feel like a toy. He sat there for almost an hour, legs stretched out, watching the clouds shift. Most of the people who passed gave him a second glance. None of them spoke. Finally, the elevator doors opened again. She stepped out. Vanessa wore a sleek gray dress and heels that clicked with precision against the marble, but her face lit up the second she saw him. "Hudson," she said, stunned. "What are you doing here?" He stood. "I didn't know if I should call. But I figured if you meant what you wrote, maybe you'd want to see me." She blinked, then smiled soft, surprised, and completely different from the polished mask she'd probably worn in that boardroom moments ago. They walked into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk that looked like it had never seen clutter. She closed the door behind them. "I can't believe you came," she said, shaking her head. "I kept checking my phone, wondering if you would." "I almost didn't." He glanced around. "This place is not exactly where I pictured you working." "I clean up well," she said, but her tone was dry. "Most people only see this version of me. I didn't think you'd show up here." "I didn't think I'd be allowed through the front door." She laughed under her breath. "You made quite the impression on the front desk. They thought you were a reporter." Hudson scratched the back of his neck. "I'm sorry if I messed up your day." "You didn't," she said quickly. Honestly, this was the best part of it. He didn't know what to say to that. Instead, he looked out at the city. "You run all this?" "For the last 4 years," she replied. "It's exhausting and constant, and some days I feel like I'm drowning in suits and numbers." He turned toward her. "So why stay?" She hesitated, then crossed her arms. "Because I'm good at it. And because most of the men in those meetings think I'm not. So I stay, and I win." He smiled. "That sounds like you. You barely know me. Maybe, but I know enough to want to." Her breath caught just slightly. So what now? Well, I was hoping you'd let me take you somewhere that doesn't have a wine list or valet parking, maybe a place where fries come in paper baskets. She laughed, the sound warmer now. I could use that. He looked at her. Tonight? She didn't answer right away. Then she walked over to her desk, grabbed her coat, and said, I'll drive. By the time they reached the edge of the city, the sun had dipped behind the skyline and the streetlights flickered on one by one. Vanessa pulled into the gravel lot of a tiny roadside diner with hand-painted signs and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. Inside, no one gave her a second glance. She ordered a burger and onion rings without blinking. Hudson watched her lean back in the booth like she'd been coming here all her life. I like this, she said after a while. No one watching, no pressure, he nodded. You ever just take a day off, do nothing? She looked at the ceiling. I haven't had a real day off in years. Everything's scheduled. Meetings, fundraisers, press, even vacations come with press releases. He frowned. That's not living. I know, she admitted, but it's all I've ever known. Their food came and they ate in easy silence for a while, then she glanced at him. What about you? Always wanted to run a garage. No, he said honestly. But it pays the bills, and it keeps me close to Nalan. She smiled at the name. He's amazing, I haven't stopped thinking about him. He keeps me grounded, Hudson said. I've made mistakes, but being his dad. That's the one thing I've gotten right. Vanessa looked at him for a long time. You really don't care about what I do you? I care about who you are, he said. Not what you own. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached across the table, taking his hand. And for the first time in a long time, Hudson felt like maybe he wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to live. The first thing Hudson noticed when he stepped into the ballroom was that his boots were a mistake. The second was Vanessa, standing beneath a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a castle, wearing a midnight blue gown that made everyone else in the room look like they'd shown up by accident. He stood frozen near the entrance, gripping the collar of a jacket he'd borrowed from one of the guys at the garage. The invitation had arrived 2 mornings ago, an envelope pressed into his hand by a courier in a black suit. No return address, just his name, sharp and deliberate across the front. Inside, a single card, Vanessa's charity gala, formal attire, attendance requested. He hadn't planned to go, not really. But something about the way she'd looked at him during their last night together, like she was trying to memorize the moment, made him feel like maybe this was something worth stepping into the unknown for. Vanessa hadn't seen him yet. She was talking to a man in a gray tuxedo who laughed too loudly and leaned in too close. Hudson watched her nod politely, but her eyes scanned the crowd. When they landed on him, her expression changed completely. She crossed the room in smooth, purposeful strides, ignoring the heads that turned in her wake. Her voice was low but electric when she reached him. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't either, he said, but my kid said I should go if I liked the lady. Her laugh was quiet but genuine. Smart kid. I told him this wasn't my kind of place. He said that's why I should go. Vanessa's gaze softened. Remind me to thank him. Hudson glanced around, uneasy. The room shimmered with champagne and diamonds. Waitstaff in white gloves floated past with trays. Somewhere, a string quartet played something he couldn't name. I feel like I walked into a movie I don't belong in. You belong here more than half these people, she said. I'm not sure I even belong in this jacket. Vanessa tilted her head. You're the only man who's made me nervous in this room. That has to count for something. Before he could answer, a woman with a clipboard approached, murmuring something in Vanessa's ear. Vanessa gave a quick nod, then turned back to him. I have to give a short speech. She hesitated. Will you stay until I'm done? Hudson nodded once. I'll be right here. As she walked away, he moved closer to the edge of the room, trying to disappear. The gala was for some ocean sustainability fund, and while he respected the cause, he felt like a wrench in a jewelry box. The speech was short. Vanessa stood on the stage in front of a gold curtain, her voice calm and clear, thanking donors, speaking about the foundation's goals, her words confident but warm. He noticed how people leaned in when she spoke. How even the ones who probably didn't care about the environment listened anyway. After the applause, she descended the steps and found him again through the crowd. "Walk with me?" she asked. He followed her out through a side door, down a hallway lined with art that probably had security lasers. They stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city. The air was cooler here, quieter. Vanessa leaned on the stone railing, her arms bare despite the chill. "You handled the crowd better than most." "Counted 4 people who looked like they wanted to ask me to leave," Hudson said. "5, she corrected. "But only one of them matters, and I told him to choke on a canapé." Hudson smiled faintly, watching the lights below. "Why did you really invite me?" "I wanted you to see it," she said. "Not the party, my life. What it looks like when it's all dressed up. And I wanted to know if you'd still look at me the same way." He turned toward her. "I don't care about any of that in there." She laughed once, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Everyone says that. Until it gets complicated. I've got a 6-year-old who thinks ketchup counts as a vegetable. I live in a house that creaks every time the wind blows, and I haven't had a vacation in 6 years. Complicated doesn't scare me." Vanessa studied him. "This isn't about money or houses. It's about what happens when the world finds out." "Finds out what?" "That I'm not with someone who owns a hedge fund or a yacht, that I'm with someone real." Hudson stepped closer. "You think I care what people say?" "I think you care what Nolan hears." His jaw tightened slightly. "I raise my son to know that what matters is how you treat people, not what they say about you." Vanessa's voice softened. "I didn't mean to pull you into this so fast." "You didn't pull me anywhere," he said. "I walked in on my own." She looked at him then, really looked, like she was letting herself believe something she hadn't dared to before. "I think I'm falling for you." Hudson's breath caught, but he didn't flinch. "Then stop thinking." She let out a quiet laugh, stepped forward, and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a kiss made for a ballroom. It was made for late nights and second chances, for 2 people who had no business finding each other and every reason not to let go. When they broke apart, she whispered, "Come home with me." He shook his head gently. "Not yet." Vanessa blinked, startled. "What?" "I want to, but I've got to be sure this isn't just a world you're letting me visit." Her eyes searched his. "It's not." "Then let's take it slow." Her lips curved. "You're the first man who's ever said that to me." Hudson stepped back, his hand brushing hers briefly. "Maybe that's the problem." He turned to leave, but not before giving her one last look. "I'll see you tomorrow." Vanessa stood alone on the balcony, city lights sprawling behind her, heart pounding like she'd just jumped without checking for a parachute. And for the first time in years, she didn't care how hard she landed. Hudson adjusted the navy tie Nolan had insisted he wear, his reflection staring back from the mirror in the hallway of their house. The boy watched from the couch, swinging his legs, still in his pajamas, a juice box clutched in one hand. "You look like a movie dad," Nolan declared, chewing on the straw. Hudson raised a brow. "That good or bad?" "Good, you look like you're gonna marry a princess." Hudson laughed under his breath. "Not quite." Mrs. Kelly knocked on the door right on time, her coat buttoned up to the neck. Hudson let her in, gave her the rundown Nolan's bedtime, the emergency numbers, the leftover pasta in the fridge, then leaned down to kiss his son goodbye. "Be good," he said. "Bring me back cake," Nolan replied. He stepped outside into the crisp evening, the air cool enough to bite through his shirt sleeves. A sleek silver town car waited at the curb, its driver silently opening the door for him. He hadn't asked for the ride. Vanessa had sent it. The car pulled away from the curb, and the city blurred past the windows. Hudson didn't know what to expect tonight. Vanessa hadn't said much beyond, "There's something I want to show you," and a location that turned out to be a private rooftop above a building with no name on the door. When the elevator opened, soft golden light spilled out. The rooftop glowed with strings of lights draped between beams of dark wood. A long table stood at the center, set for two, with flickering candles and plates that probably cost more than his truck's tires. The skyline stretched behind it, a sea of glittering windows and quiet distance. Vanessa stood at the far end, her hair pulled back, wearing a deep plum dress that swept the ground. She wasn't trying to impress him anymore. She didn't have to. "You look different," Hudson said as he stepped out. She turned, her hands clasped in front of her. "Different how? Like you're not trying to be anyone but yourself." "I'm not," she said. "Not tonight." He walked toward her, the sound of the city far below barely reaching them. "You did all this. I had help, but yes." Hudson glanced around. "Are we celebrating something?" Vanessa looked down for a moment, gathering herself. Then she met his eyes. "I've spent most of my life building something I wasn't sure I even wanted. I just kept climbing because everyone expected me to. But then I met someone who made me want something else." Hudson didn't move. He let her continue. "I never thought I'd find this kind of peace, not in my world, but you gave it to me without even trying. You and Nolan. You made me remember what it feels like to want more than numbers and meetings and headlines." She took a breath. "I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm asking you to let me be part of it." Hudson's voice was quiet. "You sure you want that?" "Absolutely." He stepped closer, their hands meeting between candlelight. "Then let's stop pretending we're from different worlds." She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to pretend anything anymore." They sat at the table, and the dinner passed in a blur of laughter and stories neither of them had shared before. Hudson told her about dropping out of college when his father died, how he'd buried himself in work and parenting to stay afloat. Vanessa confessed that she hadn't been to a grocery store in over a decade, that she didn't know how to scramble eggs, and that once, in a panic, she'd Googled how to use a coffee maker. By the time dessert arrived, a small chocolate cake with 2 spoons, Hudson leaned back, watching her with something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Vanessa reached into her clutch and pulled out a small envelope. "I wasn't sure when to give you this." He opened it slowly. Inside was a deed, his name printed across the top. The address listed was his own. "I don't understand," he said. "I bought the house next to yours," she said. "I renovated it. Quietly, I didn't want to tell you until it was done. No photographers, no staff, just a home. For us if you want it." His hand tightened around the envelope. "You want to live next door?" "No," she said, standing. "I want to live with you." He rose, too, stunned. "You'd leave all this." "I'm not leaving anything," she said. "I'm choosing something better." Hudson stepped forward, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her with everything he hadn't said. Later that night, they returned to his house. Nolan was already asleep, a flashlight tucked beneath his pillow. Vanessa stood in the doorway of his room, watching him for a long time. "You okay?" Hudson asked behind her. She nodded. I never imagined this." "You're not dreaming," he said. She turned to him. "That's the scary part." He kissed her forehead. "It's not scary if you're not doing it alone." The next morning, Nolan found them in the kitchen. Vanessa was barefoot, cracking eggs with more confidence than skill, laughing as one of the yolks broke too soon. Hudson stood behind her, his arms around her waist, guiding her through the motions. Nolan rubbed his eyes. "Do you live here now?" Vanessa looked at Hudson, then knelt in front of the boy. "If it's all right with you." Nolan thought for a moment. "Only if you make pancakes next time," Vanessa grinned. "Deal." They ate breakfast together, the 3 of them, like it had always been that way. And when Hudson looked across the table at the woman who once belonged to a world he thought he'd never touch, he realized she never really belonged to that world at all. She belonged here, with them. The sound of hammering echoed down the sidewalk as Hudson stepped out of the hardware store, a bundle of paint swatches in one hand and a receipt folded neatly in his back pocket. Across the street, the house that once sat empty beside his was now alive with motion landscapers trimming the front hedges, painters on ladders dabbing the shutters a deep forest green. Vanessa stood at the edge of the porch, phone against her ear. giving instructions to someone with the confidence of a woman who'd negotiated billion-dollar contracts. But today, she wore a faded flannel shirt tied at the waist and jeans dusted with sawdust. He crossed the street just as she hung up. "You're doing too much," Hudson said, nodding toward the chaos. "It's just a porch." "It's not just a porch," Vanessa replied, brushing hair from her cheek. "It's where we'll drink coffee, where Nolan will play with his science kits, where I'll sit on Sunday mornings and pretend I know how to relax." He smiled and handed her the bundle of paint swatches. "You're still picking the color for the kitchen, right?" "Nolan voted for volcano orange. I vetoed." "Smart man." She flipped through the samples, then held one up to the light. "What do you think of this?" He leaned in. "Too yellow." She narrowed her eyes. "You didn't even look." "I trust you." She lowered the swatch and tilted her head. "That's dangerous." "I live dangerously," he deadpanned. "Last week I used a wrench instead of a torque bar and almost lost a thumbnail." Vanessa laughed, a sound lighter than the dust floating in sunbeams across the porch. A shout from the side yard drew her attention. A delivery truck had scraped the edge of the new fencing. "I've got it," she said, already striding toward the gate. Hudson watched her go, admiring the way she moved with purpose even in sneakers. He leaned against the porch railing, the cool wood solid beneath his palm. This life, this version of his world, was still new, still folding itself around the edges of what he thought was possible. But it felt real. Later that night, with Nolan asleep and the work crews gone, Vanessa stepped into Hudson's kitchen holding a folded piece of paper. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, and a streak of white paint trailed along her elbow. "I want to show you something," she said, setting the paper down on the counter. Hudson picked it up and read the bold heading, "Grant Community Initiative Proposal." His eyes scanned the first few lines. "This is your company." She corrected. "I've stepped down." He looked up sharply. "What?" "I handed over day-to-day operations to the board. I'm keeping an advisory seat, but I'm done running it." "Vanessa, I'm not walking away from who I was," she said, "but I'm choosing who I want to be, and I want to build something that matters." "With you." Hudson glanced back at the document. It listed a proposal for a local community center focused on early education and job training. The location, just a few blocks from his garage. "You're putting this here?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I want to start where it matters most. I want Nolan to grow up seeing what change looks like. I want him to know that money isn't just meant to build walls, it can open doors." He folded the paper carefully and set it aside. "You sure you're ready for small town politics? I've dealt with billionaires," she said. "I think I can handle the zoning committee." Hudson stepped closer. "You're serious about staying?" "I've never been more serious about anything." He reached for her hand, fingers lacing with hers. "Then let's stop talking about it." They spent the next months building not just the house beside his, but a life that fit together one choice at a time. They moved in piece by piece, starting with shared dinners, then morning routines, until one day there was no longer a need for two front doors. By the time spring came around, Vanessa had traded heels for garden boots and could make scrambled eggs without Googling it. Hudson taught her how to change a tire. Nolan taught her how to assemble Lego dinosaurs with alarming speed. One Saturday morning, while Vanessa was tangled in a light argument with Nolan over whether or not cereal could be considered a soup, Hudson pulled a small velvet box from the pocket of his flannel shirt. She turned when she saw him kneel beside the breakfast table. "Hudson, I didn't want to wait. I don't need a crowd. I just need you." Her eyes filled almost instantly, and she forgot entirely about Nolan's cereal soup theory. "I don't have a mansion," he added, "or a tailored future, but I have everything that matters. And I want to build the rest of it with you." Vanessa dropped to her knees in front of him. "Yes," she whispered, the word catching in her throat. "Yes, 1,000 times." They married beneath the tree in the backyard, surrounded by neighbors, mechanics, board members, and a very proud 6-year-old in a tiny suit who insisted on giving a toast. The ceremony was simple: the food homemade, and the music came from a local jazz trio Hudson used to fix tires for in exchange for their Friday night sets. There were no press releases. No headlines, just two people who had chosen each other across every difference, every expectation, every doubt. Years later, on a quiet morning, Vanessa stood in the doorway of the community center's library, watching Nalen, now 10, help a younger child sound out words. Hudson appeared beside her, brushing sawdust from his jeans after installing a new shelf. She leaned into him, content. "This is the life I never knew I needed," she said. Hudson kissed the crown of her head. "This is the life we made." And it was. One neither of them had planned, but both had fought for, not perfect, but true, and more than enough.